Hello on the Rockers. On this episode, we talk activism and Star Trek with actors Mary Chieffo from Star Trek Discovery and Madi Goff from Groundlings. So set phasers to stunning. My guest co-host is Dan Deevy with Gaaays in Space. And me, your favorite host with the sassy most. Raise a glass and let the drinks begin.
Life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death.
I'd like to propose a toast.
This is On the Rocks with Alexander, where I drink with your favorite celebrities as we talk about fashion, entertainment, pop culture, reality TV, and, well, that's about it. So pop a cork, lean back, and raise a glass to On the Rocks.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Lord have mercy, buttons and bows and pantyhose on the Ross podcast, where we're place where we're too glam to give a damn. Girl, if any of my fans, if we ever start dating, don't sue me for defamation afterwards, because, girl, we're gonna hear about everything. This Johnny Depp situation, I cannot get enough. Poor Amber Turd. Sorry. Like us on Twitter and Instagram at On The Rocks On Air, and on Facebook On The Rocks Radio Show. You can watch our almost 300 episodes at ontherocksradioshow.com or Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV on the Outlet.tv app, Facebook Watch, streaming with pride on SVTV, and on Channel 31 on the East Coast. Hello, East Coast. We are sponsored by FanDaddies.com and NEFT Vodka. Let me introduce my guest co-host, returning, Mr. Dan Deevy, veteran producer, host, entertainment journalist, and celebrity interviewer, lifelong Star Trek fan. He was meant to go to law school, but he said, no, I'm going to be an entertainment journalist. And so he did that. And in 2015, he launched a massive grassroots social media campaign called We Want Worf. And he showed up at CBS Studios with 70,000 mini muffins. CBS was like, hey, girl. So what has started his activism for the last 6 years, he's built the whimsically titled Gaaays in Space, a full-fledged nonprofit organization specializing in activism and advocacy for the continued inclusion of LGBTQ plus characters in entertainment, particularly the often prophetic realm of science fiction. And since its founding, they have hosted 150 plus events, have spanned dozens of cities all over the U.S., and featured more than 60 Trek celebrities, have been attended by thousands and thousands and thousands, and part of my very first Star Trek convention experience in my entire life was this last year with Gaaays in Space. Please welcome Dan Deevy.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
So you did the We Want Worf campaign because there hadn't been Trek on TV for a while. Now we have so much Trek. It's like, what? It's like Section 31 is coming out. Like, everything is happening. What do you think of all of these new kind of iterations of Star Trek? Because it is a different Trek that we're seeing.
Well, let me just say, you're welcome. You're welcome, because I believe 70,000 mini muffins.
That's just a Saturday morning for me.
But being delivered, the other thing is, it was delivered in a pink and white van, driven by a Klingon in full cosplay and a Vulcan in full cosplay. And, you know, I told them that we were coming and what we were doing, but I swear to God, the woman at the gate as you go in was like, no. just no, friends, no. But I think what an amazing time for Star Trek right now. You know, we did go so long without any new Trek. And for people who are not fans of Star Trek, I don't think they could possibly understand what it means to not have it. So many of us grew up in situations where, well, I know I did, where I didn't have positive role models at home. I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in a house where it was like, if you went left, I knew I had to go right. Wow. But Star Trek, those were the people that I looked up to. Those were the people that I aspired to be like. And having that for so many years, having that for TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, the movies, and then not. It was kind of like having your family ripped away from you. And so now there are so many new members of our family, and I'm telling everyone right now, could not be nicer, kinder, more appreciative of the fans and respectful of their role in all of our lives now. So how do I feel about new Star Trek? I feel, fuck yes. It's about time.
Warp speed ahead.
That's how I feel.
I love it. All right, well, let's introduce our guest for today, Mary Chieffo, a queer actor-producer known internationally as the Klingon commander turned Chancellor L'Rell on Paramount Plus series Star Trek Discovery, returning as her iconic character for the highly popular Star Trek Online, by the way, which in itself is a whole different beast. She received her BFA from Juilliard, fancy pants, along with the prestigious Elizabeth Smith Voice and Speech Prize and the Saint Denis Prize for Outstanding Achievement and Leadership in Drama. When she wasn't covered in prosthetics and speaking Klingon, she produced, wrote, and starred as Iago in Operation Othello, a feminist, gender, and color-conscious VR adaptation, of course, of Shakespeare's Othello, alongside Miss Viola Davis, by the way. She has since developed her female interpretation of the notorious villain Iago, the Green-Eyed Monster, a musical AR experience co-created with Josh Nelson Yosef in collaboration with Juvie and Verizon, premiering at Tribeca Film Festival in June 2022, by the way. Recent acting credits include guest star role on Peacock's Girl Forever, a Bespoke's play stage reading of Madi Goff's queer sci-fi backstage drama Ladyface in LA, and co-lead in the short film Every Morning, a sci-fi love story between two women, also written by Goff, which we're going to talk we're going to have so much to talk about. She also serves as executive producer on the film in partnership with LGBTQ plus owned Spacetime Productions. So also joining us, Madi Goff, a queer writer actor, grew up in a Texas horse farm. Wow, that was a move. She's an alumni of the Groundlings Sunday Company and a recurring guest in the Groundlings Crazy Uncle Show. And if you've never seen the show, you have to go see the show. She's also a company member of Improv Theater, where they perform fully improvised stage plays in various genres and styles. She's also a founding member of Ripley Improv, which produces improv films and improvised television, streamed live on Twitch, by the way. Her sci-fi stage play Ladyface was produced as a live reading by Bespoke Plays in February, and she wrote and stars in Every Morning, as we said, a short sci-fi love story between two women, produced by and for the community. Please welcome Madi Goff and Mary Chieffo.
Yay, hello. I love that last photo, too.
Yeah.
As someone was, I think in the Vegas last year, someone like came up to you, right? And was like,
Oh, it was the best moment ever. I'm over at fan sets just looking at pins, kind of like, what else can I find of Mary? And then somebody comes up to me and is like, are you Madi Goff, Mary Chieffo's girlfriend? And I was like, yeah, that's me. And everyone is so freaking nice. So I was just like excited. Somebody was talking to me and he was like, I hope you know that you're the first lady of the Klingon Empire.
That's right.
That's what my job.
Okay, I am embarrassed for myself. How did I not think of that?
Whoever this man was, I still don't know who he was. So if he's listening or out there, please reveal yourself.
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, so we've been running with that, and that photo definitely evoked. We definitely went for Chancellor and First Lady vibes.
Now, Maddie, what was your exposure to Star Trek?
I had a roommate not long ago that loved Star Trek, and like what you were saying, how it brought the family together. She would talk about her family would come together and watch TNG, and she is of course an incredible Star Trek fan still today. There was a picture in there of a show that I guested in. She created an improvised Star Trek show called The Improvised Generation. You can find them on Twitter and everything. And she reached out to Mary. This is a roommate, 5 years ago, I think, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
She reached out to, I think we moved out during the pandemics for better quarantines. We're all still trauma is in our bodies from that. But anyway, so her name's Elisa Pearl. She reached out to Mary and was like, we do this Star Trek show. Would you want to come play in it? And Mary, who is, like you said, incredible with fans. I sit next to her at things. She's just so incredible with fans, and fans are incredible with her too. So it's quite lovely. She said, yeah, please. Okay, I will. And then she came and watched the show. I was in the show after. And then she guested in that show. Never had done improv before. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Did amazing in that show. And then Elisa's, who is in a group with me, invited Mary into another one of our shows. And that's how Mary and I first met. I'm walking into the green room and like a leotard with like crystals all over me and a blonde wig and shoes that are
Love
this
at first
tall.
sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It is. Well, I always say in that show, and this is glam in the style of glow, because it's just long form genre improv. And Maddie's character, again, in this full regalia, in the episode I guested on, another improviser challenged her to do push-ups, and so she dropped on the floor in these like 6-inch stiletto boots.
They're insane.
In the full glam, did like 20 push-ups or something like that.
I've done that.
Yeah.
In stiletto.
We're still alive.
Yeah.
So, Mary, when we first talked to you on the Rocks, many things have changed for you.
Yes.
You did come out.
Yes.
So I want to know, what was that inspiration to be, now's the time to come out. I'm confident to reveal to the world.
Yes.
Because as an actor, even in today's day and age, it's still a heavy choice.
Yeah.
Whether to come out or not to come out. Does it affect your career? So what was that kind of moment you were like, I'm going to be honest?
Well, there's so many layers to it. One, I think I was just still investigating. I'm such a perfectionist. I just wanted to make sure that I was going to be truthful in whatever I put out there. And I will say, I mean, the beauty of, it's so beautiful to have Maddie here with me on many levels, because we are, as we'll talk about, creating queer content and all that sort of stuff. But over the pandemic, we had known each other since 2018, like we were talking about, but we were beginning to unpack our queerness together, which was part of, the moment where we realized, oh, we're not just unpacking this together, we're in love. But
by the way, it's just it's a side effect of that. Yeah,
it definitely and but it was definitely the fact that I think for both of us, and I'm sure Maddie will speak to our own experience, but like, I'm a high frequency person and I do a lot of things, and I know you're this way too, of just like creating content and do it. And so did like the pandemic did make me take a breath. And we talked like mid-pandemic, I think.
Yep.
And those thoughts were definitely there. I was definitely like ready to investigate further. I think I certainly just like romance as a whole was something very confusing to me, and relationships and dating. And something I will say is like, we found each other through friendship, which was exactly how I was going to fall in love. Like, I didn't do the typical dating thing, because that was never going to be in the cards for me. That was just like not how I find love. And which I'm so grateful for. And I always joked, I had always had the fantasy of like, fall in love with your best friend. I'm like, but you can't do that, because then you're thinking about it as a, and I did like literally as a kid, like try and make that happen. Didn't work. But so it is a very fluid answer, I think, to your question, because, and the funny thing too, it ended up being that I more officially came out on Star Trek Day, but I had been in Vegas the month prior. We had just gotten together. Vegas actually really put the fire under us, I think, because Maddie had already...
Everybody's gay in Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. But we said, hey, we're heading
What happens in Vegas?
Yeah. Well, it is funny, because I think that was part of it. We were going with my best friend Justin, who you met last night at the event, and the three of us were definitely going to stay in my hotel room together and have a good time. And I think for both of us, as we got closer and closer to the event, and obviously I think feelings were just revealing themselves more and more, we were both going, oh my God, like, I'm going to be in Vegas with this person, like, in the same bed, probably, going, like, and then I didn't want it to be just a thing. Like, I think became very evident, and it was, like, a week before we went to Vegas, where it was like, okay, this needs to be made clear. I think we were both very nervous and very, like, oh my God, and spent, like, the whole night, like, talking face to face.
We told our whole, like, the too long version of our love story. It's still a good version, but we told that version to our friend Ralph, and he was, like, sitting, he was like, fucking kiss already!
It was very, it was, and very, and when people ask who made the first move, it was very much, we were like, that.
We did. We both pointed to each. He was like, who made the first move? And just instinctually.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, I could keep talking in a lot of different ways about it, but I think it became clear that it was the moment to do it. And I'm so grateful that I got to do it being in love, and that's my journey with it. And it's just been really beautiful, and we have been able to share the experience together, and then be able to support each other in our own journeys with it. And again, the Star Trek Day thing was so funny, because again, we had been walking around Vegas, holding hands introducing her as my girlfriend. Like, it was there. I had mentioned, you know, on one of the panels. Saying,
Which is
like,
how one of my good friends found
Oh,
out.
yeah.
She was in Vegas listening to the panel, and Mary just goes, my girlfriend, Madi Goff, and my friend was like...
And we were like, we were going to tell you. Like, we just didn't see you before this moment. But, yeah, it has been that fun kind of, like, slow burn. Or, like, but then Star Trek Day, it just kind of... I was on the carpet basically speaking to my queerness and celebrating it, and obviously, as we will continue to talk about, why Trek is something that makes that so possible, and was a huge part I've spoken to as well, with Wilson and Anthony being on panels with them. And again, like, I think that was part of the choice to, like I was on those panels. They're the ones that should be talking about their roles on the show and being, you know, openly gay actors for pretty much their entire career, and like being inspired by that, but also being like the random Klingon in the corner who's like, you know, I'm still exploring my sexuality. Like, I'm really inspired by this, but like, I haven't dated, you know, like, it wasn't the moment on any of those panels to make that statement. So I think I was just kind of quietly taking everything in, and again, being inspired by it and knowing that my path was there. But I would say that in the past, yeah, I guess almost since I was on the show, and before that as well, I did find myself start saying, like, when I find my person, which is a term that I use for Maddie, and somebody asked me early on too, like, well, how would you describe your personality, your sexuality? And I was like, Madi Goff, like, and I think, you know, I think there is an element of that there. It just felt like the right moment. But Star Trek Day was funny because Wilson wasn't aware of how out I was just kind of being, and so if anyone watched that moment on the carpet on the live stream, which I knew was live, but I didn't quite realize that, like, everyone at the Skirball Center that I was about to walk towards was watching it live. So,
if you can watch it back to Wilson,
yeah,
his emotional journey, because he's known Mary for so long, when he hears her say, as a queer woman, he goes, and then he, like, almost cries for a second. And then he comes, I'm sorry, I'm just barely holding it together. Such a cute experience.
And poor Wilson, like, hashtag single forever. He's like, when am I going to find somebody?
We're gonna
Mary got somebody real fast.
We're going to find that person. I know, his speech, I just listened to his GLAAD speech and all that. I thought he played with that quite well, but said some really beautiful things as well there. But that was definitely a distinct moment, and it feels, again, as Maddie spoke to, her exposure to Star Trek was also my exposure to Maddie, was Aliza inviting me to do the show. So if it weren't for my involvement with Trek, it's, you know, I'd like to believe that the stars would have aligned otherwise, but like in this timeline, Star Trek led me to Maddie.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So thanks, Star Trek.
Well, and also, you get to Star Trek Vegas, and you see a booth that says, Gaaays in space.
Yes, exactly.
You had to say, I think I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
This is going to work out.
I mean, it really, the community that already existed, and again, had already, you know, been a part of events for you, and like, you know, like always a huge ally, and just wanting to make sure that I knew at least a sense of where I fell in it.
Well, and to your point, you know, there's no like queer club that you need a card for. Everybody is always evolving, and a number of actors have come out as bisexual, trans, and so there's this inclusivity that your queerness is not diminished by somebody having been out of the closet for 20 years. It's all one story that we're all telling in this universe. But I want to talk about a little hot topic. We kind of talked about it with Denise Crosby. You know, Discovery is very woke.
Yes.
It's like we got the gays, we got trans, we got non-binary. It's like we got everything happening. And I know some of the fans were kind of resistant because it was a very different Star Trek. And then it was like, are we putting everything on the plate just to put it on the plate? And so my question to you, and Maddie as well, as a queer filmmaker, is there such a thing as too woke? Has Star Trek kind of thrown everything at the wall a little too soon, too much?
No, is that I don't think they've done too much. I think, if anything, I want more expanse. I mean, I think I hope that what we see, and Discovery has become like the hub, which I'm proud, even though I'm not, you know.
It literally is. It's like,
yeah. I feel, even though it's like it became more queer after I left, but that's like fine. Like it was already, but it just keeps getting, which is awesome. And we've, as we'll speak to later, both Issa and Blue were a part of Maddie's play. And we've gotten to know Ian as well. Like, it's so wonderful, the connection that not only Star Trek gives us in these, in the different actors getting to meet each other, but then again, being a part of this queer community and getting to celebrate that. I think, if anything, we were actually on a walk earlier today talking about this, that like in genre and in sci-fi, so as we all know, in these earlier shows, it was so much about projecting ourselves onto characters, and now we're in this interesting place where we are seeing people more actualized, and then what is that combination? How do we both tell the metaphorical story that we love, which is why I know I was drawn to fantasy and sci-fi as a kid, was I could actually process my own life better through the metaphor, but then how do we make sure that there are characters, and as is in Maddie's play, it's like where does you know, homophobia, misogyny, where does that live in this sci-fi world, and how do we best communicate that? How do we, you know, and in Trek, it's this ideal world where that no longer exists, hopefully. But as I experienced too, when it came to feminism and exploring misogyny, we got to see with L'Rell in the Klingon Empire, because they aren't the Federation, how she was still up against these, you know, jerky men. And so I think it's interesting within sci-fi where we can still explore those stories. And I know I'm not fully up to date with the Discovery stories, but having watched the 3rd season, and certainly like it was interesting to have Gray be Trill, and like because Trill had such a significant impact on a lot of members of the queer community across the spectrum of
it was
the queer
putting
community.
language for terms that we didn't know at that point.
Yeah.
And it was kind of
it ended up being an amazing platform for the trans community, without that having been the intent, having been recognized by anyone who was not a member of our community.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's so incredible. Back then, we were so desperate to see ourselves in there somewhere, that as long as there was a tiny little thread that we could possibly latch on to, we grabbed hold and we held on for dear life. And now, thankfully, because of your show and you as a person, we don't have to. I mean, it is still amazing sci-fi to be able to do that, but it's no longer the only way for us to feel that we're there. And I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
And even the L'Rell love story, in terms of, you know, feeling not part of your body, and there was all these kind of issues, and so it was very it was queer friendly, that story.
Totally.
Where it's like, well, what is love? How do you identify? There are no parameters anymore.
Yeah, and it's funny because I hadn't quite thought of, I mean, I definitely had thought of those themes, but a huge aspect of L'Rell for me, certainly once she accepted that Tyler was an entirely his own entity, she still loved him, or she still loved Voq, and then she had another relationship with Tyler, and you know, it was very nuanced in that way. And I, you know, if anything, part of the dilemma with so many of these shows is like that could be a whole like you could just spend a whole season on exploring the nuances of how
I want to see a L'Rell spinoff, don't you?
Oh my God.
Since they're producing shows left and right, let's do L'Rell.
Yeah.
I do like the idea that she really does find the first lady of the Empire, though. I think after the Tyler experience, like
that'll be great.
That lady Klingon needs a lady Klingon.
I totally agree. I would watch the heck out of that show. I feel like storytelling, it's any aspect of storytelling is like a map. So let's say queerness, the map of queerness and storytelling. And if you stop exploring the map, that's when you're in trouble. And like we explored the hell out of the straight place, right? And so now Discovery maybe went, well, let's go all the way over here on the map. And that's what I think is, as long, because there's like coming out stories too, right? Which Discovery is not really about that, I don't think. But there's, you know, high schooly type of stories that are about coming out, right? And people are like, I'm so tired of all those coming out stories. Like, well, they're gonna exist until coming out doesn't have to exist.
But I do, and
Plus, also, it took half a freaking century for us to get here.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as too much. Like, you had all of that time. Calm down about saying Star Trek is too woke. It's like anybody who says that, have you seen the show ever?
Well, yeah, the themes have always been there, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we just keep embracing the themes on a better level. But yeah.
So, Maddie, as a queer filmmaker, you know, we have so much content out there. And to your point, there was a period of time that all of the content had to be so heavy. And so it was either a coming out story or it was an AIDS story and about like the trauma about that. Now, as a filmmaker, what kind of stories are you inspired now to tell? Because we can kind of be comfortable in our queer storytelling where it doesn't have to be, you know, some massive statement.
I love that question, and I have such a specific answer because I've been in kind of this like pressure cooker of various points in my life where that answer like made it very clear to me. I'm excited to tell stories that just normalize gayness. So I love coming out stories, all about them. People tell them. I want to tell stories that you see just gayness as part of the world. I think Schitt's Creek is also a great example of that, right?
I love that we all want to date David, but if we actually dated somebody like that, we'd shoot ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
You know what? Ew. Ew.
What I also secretly love about Schitt's Creek that might, you know, get me some angry looks, but the guy who plays Patrick is not gay.
Right.
How many straight men need to play gay men? Like, I'm so excited for straight men to start to have to play gay men. We don't need to, like, launch straight into it and have it all straight, white, and, you know, and plain characters immediately. But I do love the idea that that we will get to that point as we explore the map of casting in addition to queerness.
There's a great film on Hulu called Crush. And it's about high school students.
Top of our list.
So watch it. So I just interviewed Tyler Alvarez, who came out last year, and he's in it. He's a gay kid, but he's always cast as the straight kind of jock guy. And so it's such an interesting opposite. Yeah. But also the film talks about two lesbians in high school, and it's a rom-com. There's no statement of like, this is a queer story. Yeah. It just happens to be a rom-com, and it just happens to have two female leads in love with each other. And it's done so subtly and just so naturally. And it's like, that's the younger generation. That's their experience. It's not some shocking thing to come out as non-binary or trans or gay. This is the younger generation. It's so weird that our government's trying to silence these kind of voices when they're happening automatically.
I mean, that obviously it's horrible that the government's trying to silence people, children who have it's horrible, but the resistance that I get to see against it of these kids just like take up their protest banners, that's exciting. It stinks, but it's that they have to do it, period. But boy, in that way, it's the pressure cooker that like crystallizes a point of view that is about love.
I want to ask, and you know, we're in Pride season, and I write for a couple of magazines, and every headline that I get is, you know, queer actor, blah, blah, blah. And it's always that label. And it's like, I understand that we're going through a period of representation, but then when we're so fixed to the label, it's like, well, they're an actor as well. Are we talking about their acting skill? Are we talking about the plays that they've done or whatever? Or are we just talking about their queer storyline? I think media is just putting that label because it's a buzzword. And when we do so much, like, I hate to say it, but like when I see Neil Patrick Harris playing a straight role, in my mind, I'm always, he's gay. I mean, no matter what we do. He was in Into the Woods, and I'm like, Baker, he's gay. Because we put that label on him so much, and he's become an actor who's like Wilson Cruz. Unfortunately, we always think he's the gay actor making waves. And so at what point do our labels kind of overshadow the rest of your aspect as a filmmaker, as an actor?
Well, something that, in line with what both of you were saying about, and with casting, there's a great article I remember. So this is a slight tangent, but that's how I talk. I took various improv classes from Maddie, and the last one she taught me was rom-com. This is, again, genre improv. So, but what I really want to celebrate about how Maddie taught that class, and she'd been teaching it for a while when I took it over Zoom in the pandemic, is how inclusive it is. One of the things she assigns for people to watch is, 90s rom-coms, also disclosure documentary. And it's all about finding chemistry with everyone and then discovering, because it's improvised, where the romance is, but it's so about celebrating the spectrum of sexuality and, you know, finding love in unexpected ways, because that's what we love to see. And we did also just binge watch Heartstopper on Netflix.
I haven't seen it yet.
Just a goddamn delight. And again, that feeling of like, just it, that is, you know, there is a coming out element to that story, but the way it sets that rom-com world that we love, where, you know, like, things are probably gonna work out fine, but the stakes are just high enough, and like, they're in high school, and like, oh, and they all, and he makes those little
We watched the whole
smile.
movie like
literally,
totally
she
gripped
goes there, I was like, oh, but what I wanted to speak to as well is what Billy Eichner just did with, or is, you know, we're gonna get to see the film, but like, cast completely LGBTQ plus actors in all the main roles, including the straight ones. And he was saying that because he would look at these rosters when they were asking him, you know, about casting, and there was just still too much of a disparity between the number of straight actors being considered for gay roles and the number of gay actors being considered for the straight roles. And so I think that's the exciting moment. And Jen Richards, who's another amazing woman that I follow on Twitter, and she follows me back. I feel really cool. My mom's actually just about to, they're on the Anne Rice Witches thing, and I saw the announcement. I didn't know that she was also, and I texted my mom, like, oh my God, you have to say hi to Jen. Please tell Jen we think she's amazing. And I was like, oh, great, cool. But Jen speaks so beautifully in Disclosure documentary and just online in general, and in this one article I remember sending Maddie for the rom-com class, and Dan Deevy as well was talking about the casting of Patrick and how we're hopefully entering this era where it is such an expanse, and so we're on the precipice where we still have to, those labels have to be there to a certain extent, but that we are hopefully really reaching that point where it goes beyond that. And it is an interesting balance, because I think too, when it's tying back to like coming out and what that means, and like I think a lot of people, especially those that are more, you know, somewhere on the spectrum, and they, again, well, I can't spoil Heartstopper, but I think a lot of these more recent stories, you know, really are also looking just, again, across the spectrum of how people discover where their sexuality lies, and that was very helpful to me. Like Jane the Virgin, Petra on Jane the Virgin, very helpful to me in her journey, in her finding her sexuality. And I think just the more that that's there in the storytelling, and if it's acted beautifully, and then the more that we can at least champion, and I have been grateful in a lot of the things I've been going out for since I've come out, I do see a lot of, you know, roles that are queer, somewhere on the queer spectrum, and, you know, I'm always grateful that I'm being considered, knowing that I'm out, knowing that that's part of the pitch that my reps are putting out there, is like, she wants to be, you know, able to do that. And so the fact that I think overall people are trying to be more active in that is very exciting, but there's still a way to go, and you know, it is a challenge, because and we've felt this as women too, to be, you know, a female actor, or like Dr. Erin McDonald, who Spacetime Productions that we referenced, who with our short film, that is her LGBTQ plus owned production company, and like for her sometimes it's like female doctor, or, you know, like, you know, female scientist, and she's like, scientist, but like also, but she owns that. Like, she also celebrates the fact that she is a badass, you know, PhD in astrophysics with like a bunch of geeky tattoos. Like, I think it's a real balance.
I think that's why representation in the actual narrative is important, right? If you read Dr. Erin McDonald, people might just go male. Mm-hmm. But then if you get to see a story about Dr. Erin McDonald and you suddenly see her face and her femininity shows up, you go, oh, okay. And that's what I think it's like, it's too woke, or whatever that means, when you're not getting the stories, if it's just there, mm-hmm. which actually still does serve a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like, you know, the threads that we would grab onto and just say, I don't even need the story, I just want to keep seeing their face. Yeah. I think that's super fair. But I think you really get deeply into representation when the narrative shows up on stage, on the screen, and it's baked in. I think there is representation when there's characters who identify a certain way and maybe you don't see their narrative, but boy, is it great representation. Or girl, person, isn't it great representation?
Watch that. Watch that.
No, you know, I have
Person,
been
human,
corrected.
life form.
I have been corrected though when I say girl, and they're like, "You don't know how to identify." I'm like, "No, I'm saying like girl, like girl."
Yeah,
It's like,
that's
no,
fine.
you
It doesn't bother
you
me.
constantly have to think of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I
you know,
love that y'all came back in being
Yeah.
from
Yes,
Texas.
from
I was like,
Texas.
yes.
What was that move like, by the way?
It was, thank goodness. I grew up in Austin, Texas.
Okay, so
right
that's-
outside of Austin. And what I always say, I have two incredible parents who were Republican until they went, no, what? No.
Yeah.
And then they became different. They're both
Remember
very-
when being Republican didn't mean you were an awful person?
Maybe that,
What
yeah,
happened?
it was that time. And then as soon as it did.
Yeah.
And it's not. I don't hate all Republicans, but my my parents are wonderful allies, Democrats, and great listeners too, and also great educators. My mom's always sending me like, "Oh, I found out this story about what Mother's Day really used to mean," and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know this." So wonderful, wonderful parents. So I feel like I did get a small rural vibe in school, and there were no gay people. Sorry if you went to my school, I won't say, and you're like, I was gay and I was out. I missed you. There were very few gay people, and gayness was often represented as a mental illness where I grew up, and I would say in a lot of ways it maybe still is, or not maybe, it still is. Yeah. And so that was tough. Then when I realized that acting was a possibility, I laughed because my first career objective was to become the first woman in the NBA. And then get this patriarchal kind of like thing baked into here. The WNBA was invented. And I was like, gosh darn it. I couldn't, that's amazing to me, right? That I was mad because I wasn't going to get to be the only girl, which is such a stereotype that we kind of have to unlearn. So then I was going to be the first woman in the WNBA to dunk. Then I stopped growing. And I was like,
Maddie, how tall are you?
I am, well, for a long time I thought I was 5'1", but there was a time I played college basketball and they listed me as 5'4". So between 5'1" and 5'4", you choose.
I do think recently, I think it's 5'3".
We think it's 5'4".
I just love you're with Mary, who's like 40 feet tall. It's like, my lord.
Well, what I love was so many. It is interesting, like in unpacking my sexuality stuff. I think so many people. I have to bring in Kylo Ren because he did help me understand my sexuality, which is so interesting because I went from thinking that I was attracted to him, which not to say that there's something there. Again, we were talking about the term pan-romantic, demisexual. It's so many syllables, but like if I were to like really put a label on how I feel, again, is Madi Goff is my sexuality, but in the energy of people, I think ultimately I was going to end up with a woman, and I'm very glad it's this woman. But anyway, Kylo Ren. And Maddie was actually a part of this journey, though, because I get very caught up, and like I think it's because he's an angry Scorpio, and we're both Scorpios, and like there's a lot that like I related to.
Girl, you've really thought about this.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Maddie has had to hear this.
This
Literally,
is the tip of the iceberg.
every party I'm at, and I'm like talking to someone, and I'm like starting to go, and then Maddie walks by, and she's like,
all right,
talking about Kylo Ren. All right. But what was really significant, and I do love that it ties into my queerness, is that like I went on this podcast that her friend does where we're like fangirling, or like
it's a wonderful little podcast.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called. I'll have to look it up.
But generally the idea is like a certain character like Kylo Ren in this instance, and like a collection of like three or four different women talking about the character in kind of what I discovered, very sexualized way. And I came in with like my Kylo Ren notes. Again, like I could write a novel. And
she comes in with a dissertation
about like the dark and the light. And I do think the themes of moving past the binary, like I think it's all there. And Star Wars is even more of a binary world because it's so much about, like, and that the characters like Kylo Ren who are in the gray feel they must be evil because they have some darkness in them. And I think that is a very like interesting. We were talking earlier too about like queer coding and villains in general, and how that was like literally an aesthetic thing that happened, and then moving forward from that. So anyway, related deeply to him. doing this podcast, they're really talking about like wanting like him to like, and I was like, oh, like that's not what I'm thinking about. That's so interesting.
I did the Twilight Saga version of it and the same thing, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe it'll get back to some of my notes.
Well, have you ever seen Last Week Tonight with John Oliver?
Yeah,
and he does the whole Adam Driver, like, you are a massive hunk of a man, and I want to have sex with you. Yeah. I'm, a kind of straight guy, but you, buddy,
you can step
you.
You
can step.
Oh my gosh.
Sure, yeah. It's true, and it is. And there's something about his energy, and I have said that I want to be a female Kylo Ren, or looking at Adam Driver's career, and I particularly, I mean, Kylo Ren is the specific character. I think he's incredible and such a hard worker and all that stuff. But there is something about that type of character that the way women haven't fully been granted access to that type of character, in the way that like there still has to be like a femme fatale quality when we get that level of female villain, which I love. I mean, I love that aesthetic, and actually this is kind of a segue into my Iago interpretation, but I think that I'm still trying to understand where I fall within that, and part of what brought us together too is we're people that like to get really glammed up and like have a good time, but then also we'll be in our shorts and hoodies and be comfortable that way. And I think like I love the fluidity of that, and for me it's like where Kylo Ren gets to kind of be Adam Driver, who is such an interesting face and doesn't have to be glam, but we're so drawn to him. Mm-hmm. And yet I also I like my dark shadow, so if I were playing that character, I'd probably be like, no, put the dark shadow on my eyes. But like that's not feeling the necessity to be, well, anything that's taking away from the male gaze, which I always like to make, not the male gaze, the male gaze.
We don't want to take away from the male gaze.
We're not taking away from the male gaze.
Yeah, good luck trying. Good luck trying.
Exactly. But I do think that that's kind of where it all comes to a head, is where whatever, that is the term that we often use, whatever that means. And I think that was also part of the journey of unpacking my sexuality, as we talked about this too, not wanting to objectify women as a feminist. It's really this thing of being like, oh, and this version of what I should desire in a woman is actually not what I desire. It's what we find attractive is also a spectrum. And like I said, I knew it was going to be through friendship that I found someone, and then that other level of attraction is also there. But I think that that's something I've been trying to say when I've been on interviews since I came out, is like I want to speak to, yes, the fact that I'm attracted to a woman, but also that there's so many different ways to find love. And I think we get so caught up in there's one way to do it. And
Adam Driver still has a shot.
Yeah.
No, but and this is what I do love about the non-binary community. It's really changed it for a gay man. When I came out, the gays were snapping their fingers, or they were like a butch gay. And now there's so many things that are in between. There's no right or wrong. There's no what gay looks like anymore. This idea of masculine and feminine on both genders, or in between genders. Yeah. It's really opened it up for us as gay men to really be ourselves. Yeah. To be like, hey, some days I wear Star Trek uniforms, some days I wear nail polish, and some days gray sweatpants.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's what really, and again, like you were saying, and like straight men to play gay characters, or what that everyone should have the experience that everyone is liberated. Moving past the binary is liberating for everyone. Yes. And like that's the world I want to live in. When we keep and it's human beings, we're so funny because we're so community based, and we so want to feel included. So I think that you see it across the board on every which opinion inside. We do kind of glom onto each other sometimes in a way that can be a little protective or a little bit scared, but because we want to feel loved and we want to feel protected and together. So it is a challenge, because it really, the more that we expand and the more we look outward, and I love hearing you say that, because I think the more that we can celebrate everyone's different interpretation and truly try and listen, and things that maybe don't make sense to me right away, or like, what are you saying here? What are you rejecting? What are you celebrating? What in me am I rejecting or celebrating? And I've certainly reflected on, for me too, what I really celebrate about being a woman with my size, and you know, cutting my hair was a big thing. I had my hair like this when I graduated college and had been told that it was going to put me in a box. And it kind of did. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know how many years ago it was, but still the roles that I was being called in for were more one-dimensional, often queer characters. And I think that's what's interesting. I think I was retaliating against the one-dimensional definition, as opposed to, like, had there been better representation or better roles to fill, it might have allowed me to really, like, look at my sexuality at an earlier moment. And again, we said, like, we're glad that our journeys led us to where we are now. And again, would like to believe whatever different journey we would have found each other, but this particular timeline allowed me to explore that. But I do think when we put ourselves in boxes, it just limits everyone.
Well, you know, it's so interesting. We were talking earlier about the different generations and how the younger queer generation now has different, you know, challenges than we did. There was an episode of Will and Grace when it came back, where Will is going on a date with a 22-year-old or whatever, and he's like, "Didn't you have any struggles?" And he's like, "Well, my parents divorced, and they both planned a coming out party for me on the same day. That was tough.
Real.
That was tough." And he also says, "Are you actually angry with me that I'm not having all these struggles?" And Will is like, "Yeah."
I do have to say, though, with what's happening government-wise and politically and socially, I think our younger generation is starting to get a whiff of what our generation has had to go through. And I was in a gig in Phoenix, of all places, last week, and it was a very certain type of crowd that kind of turned, and then people were jeering at me because I had, like, a sequin jacket on. And it was so weird being outside of the West Hollywood bubble. Yeah. And it was seen as like, oh, this is still happening out there, this kind of energy out of nowhere. You know, so I think our younger generation, they're going to have to rough it for a little bit. We could talk and talk and talk forever. You guys have to come back.
Yes. Yes, we will. And yeah, we certainly want to talk, because again, we're really excited that we are, you know, and I'm very lucky that Madi is such a prolific, amazing writer, and that I get to be part of the producerial side and helping shape. But it is exciting to be empowered to create our own content too, and explore exactly, like, we're not going to know until we explore what the queer content is that we want to put out there. And I'm excited by, particularly because we do love sci-fi and genre, that we're trying to figure out how it defines itself for us in this space. And so I hope, as you know, as the short comes to fruition, we're have a production meeting later today, but it's in the throes of being edited right now. Exciting. And very proud of how inclusive our crew was. And that's one thing I did want to say was representation in front of the camera is so important, but something I've become such a huge champion of is behind the scenes. And that really became clear to me when I was working on Trek, because we had so much on camera. And, you know, as you see, and again, Discovery, I think, is one of the greatest examples. We have Michelle Paradise as the showrunner, you know, and she's created a really wonderful inclusive writers room. So, of course, the stories are going to reflect that. But I think that, like, that's what we need to see more of across the board in Star Trek, in Star Wars, in Marvel. And I think it is happening. Yep. And beyond franchises, in any room. And speaking of Jane the Virgin, Jenny Erman was excellent at that. She knew where she fell, and then she made sure that the room reflected the characters that were being told. And no one person is going to fully represent one character. 100%. But you want an expansive opinion, you want different perspectives, and that was something that we really made sure happened on our short film, and I think the product is going to be better because of it. And it's just really exciting. Thankfully, a lot to Star Trek. You know, Aaron and I are grateful that we are able to champion this piece on a production level as well. And say, okay, great, thank you for the inclusivity that Star Trek has. Now we will implant it into this project. And then, you know, Madi's written a story that is exploring so many different facets of it, and it is normalized. It is also very innately queer. Like, I think she channels so beautifully, and then kind of pieces it back together. Like, what are the themes that are coming?
Often after a first reading, people are like, oh, I really saw this theme, and I'm like, I wrote it in there.
You totally intended that, right?
Intended that.
But I think that what we've really again, we were talking about earlier today, is like the stories become innately queer because that's part of her experience and whatever that means and the different layers of unpacking it.
And I'm still like, I do channel or, something gets on the page and I go, oh, well, that's a pretty little thing I got to unpack, and then unpack it and then change it, so that the story, has a little bit more of a representation that I'm excited to put on camera.
Well, that's also the proof of what good writing is. Good writing is you write something with one intent, and then when people read it, they see other things. They can relate in a different way, and it means something to them that's different than what it means to you. It's like you read Shakespeare. It doesn't matter how many times you read a play, you feel and see something different every time. So, yeah.
Well, and even like studying Shakespeare in college is when I read Shakespeare now, because I've gone through so many different life changes. It's a whole different outlook. Please tell everybody where they can find you and follow you. Also, when the short film's going to come out, where we can see it.
Yeah. Oh yes, we don't know when the short film's going to come out because we're doing a festival circuit with it. So, but you can follow Spacetime Productions on Twitter and on not Facebook.
Yeah. Instagram.
The other thing they own.
Yeah.
Instagram.
The other meta thing.
And you can find me on Instagram at MSMADIG, Miss Maddie G, and on Twitter at the same handle.
Yes. And then I am Mary the Chief on Instagram and Twitter. And yes, and then Spacetime Productions. And are those all the places that people should follow? We did the reading that we did of Maddie's play that involved Issa and Blue. Bespoke Plays is the group that we work with, and they are honestly doing a lot of both queer and sci-fi, often together, content. And they do readings every month. There's one in June, then they're taking a little hiatus, and it'll be back in the fall. But also
and
a great
we
group.
have plans to produce this show called Ladyface, which is super queer, and if everyone is available, we'll hopefully include Mary and Blue and Issa.
What about the TikTok?
We don't have the TikTok. We're not that young.
I know.
We'll leave that to Ian and Blue. They're so young.
Follow Ian and Blue on TikTok.
I don't even know what it is. No. I just have heard it from people. So
we watch the Insta stories of cows.
This is how. Yeah, that's true. This is what I listened to a NPR Planet Money podcast on TikTok. That's how close I got, and then went no.
Downfall of civilization. Downfall of civilization.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us, Dan. Where can people find and follow Gaaays in Space?
We are on all the things except for the TikTok. So Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Gaaays in Space. 3 A's in Gaaays, 3 A's in Space. You leave out an A, I don't know where you're going to end up, but I take no responsibility for it.
Don't mess those coordinates up.
Yeah. Exactly.
On that note, happy Pride, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Stay healthy, stay sexy, and stay tipsy.
This has been another episode of On the Rocks. Tweet me and slide into my DMs on Twitter and Instagram at On the Rocks On Air. Find everything On the Rocks for free at OnTheRocksRadioshow.com. Subscribe, like, review, and share. Until next week, stay fabulous.